Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new malicious compliance content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
First one is titled, "Sure, I'll repaint the islands with the wrong paint." This one I felt kinda bad for because it involved a few injuries, very minor ones luckily. I didn't want to do it, but it came down to my job, so I complied. Here is the story. Years and years ago, back in the early 90s, I worked as a manager at a gas station. We had a great area supervisor who decided to retire. We were all very sad, and even more sad when her replacement came in. He was a total butt. He had just come out of retiring from the military and felt that with his military experience he could whip us into shape. One of the things he wanted done was make the stations look good, which I'm 100% for, but also do it with as little money as possible, which was fine if it was the right thing to do. This time, one of several, it wasn't. So around the pumps are these raised islands. The islands are painted on top with a special paint that has a good grit to it, so when it gets wet from rain or whatever, and people stand on them, they don't slip and fall. Well, this area supervisor wanted the islands repainted, so he got some paint out of our supply depot and dropped it off at all the stations he ran. No problem, I went around myself and painted the sides of all the islands. They looked great, but the tops of them were not painted. So he shows up one day to inspect and sees that the tops aren't painted. Asks me why. I told him this isn't the right paint. It has to be the gritty thick paint because we don't want customers slipping and falling. He starts yelling at me, tells me he is going to fire me if they aren't repainted by the next day, blah blah blah, and says that it's not my responsibility to worry about the customers, it's his. Total egotistical mindset. Do as I say, don't think. So, I did what he said. I repainted all the tops of the islands that day. Nice warm day in the fall, hadn't gotten wet yet really. Next days he shows up, looks around, and has this grin on his face that he beat me into submission type thing. Says something like, "See, next time just do what I say, don't question my judgment." I just nodded, knowing what was about to come, and dreading it, because I knew that the customer was going to be the victim here, but there was nothing I could do. A week later we get our first rain. Some of our islands stayed dry under the canopy, but about one half of them got wet because the rain was coming in somewhat sideways. And then it happens. Lady gets out of her car in nice shoes with no grip, steps on the island, slips and falls. She's not really hurt, just a bit of her backside and back, but we call the ambulance anyway. She's upset. I just tell her to bill the station, and give her the address to make a claim against my area supervisor's info. Then it happens 3 more times over the next couple days. 2 of them were very minor, but the customers were also upset, but didn't get an ambulance or go to the hospital, but they also got the contact information of my area manager. Then number 4 happened. Could have been much worse, but this guy was dressed in a super nice and apparently expensive suit, slipped and fell with the hose in his hand right after taking it out of the car. He twisted his ankle, cue ambulance, and a few drops of gas got on his clothes. I again provide my area supervisor's info. Then the weather dries up and the problem goes away for that week at least. About 10 days later my area supervisor drives into my station with his boss. I had met his boss a couple times, cool guy, kinda one of these people that don't take BS from anybody but is super down to earth and reasonable. Apparently the nice suit guy was a lawyer. He has filed a lawsuit against the station for medical bills, pain and suffering, and the replacement of his super expensive suit. I don't know what the lawsuit was for, but it was way over 10 grand. So the area supervisor and his boss come up to me to discuss the situation. I told them that wasn't the only incident. As I had filed my paperwork as I was supposed to, there was a total of 4 while it was raining. The big boss asked me why this was all of a sudden a problem. I looked at the area supervisor, who I could tell on his face was hoping I was going to say something untrue, but nope, I am going to tell it exactly how it was. I laid it all out. I told him what I was given. I told him that I didn't paint the tops originally. That I told the area supervisor that it wasn't the right paint. He told me to do it anyway or lose my job. I even told him that the area supervisor told me that customer safety wasn't my responsibility, it was his. Which is why I gave everyone who got injured the area supervisor's information. The big boss asked me a couple questions, then turned to the area supervisor and said something like, "Okay, I have what I need, let's go," and they left. Surprisingly, the area supervisor kept his job after that but had it out for me. I quit a few months later with no notice for a better job. But he got a huge reaming. Not only that, but his expenses were huge that quarter. He ended up on the bottom of the list, rank-wise, of area supervisors for costs for the quarter. They ended up having to have crews go to all his stations, strip off the bad paint, and repaint all of the tops of the islands with the thick gritty paint. And it had to be done fast before the next rain came in. So huge expense. All he had to do was get me a can or two, and the other stations, of the gritty paint, and I would have gladly used it. But because he had an ego and thought he knew best, it cost the company and his area the settlement of the lawsuit, the other injury claim, and the cost of the crews to come out and repaint all the tops. I'm just glad the injuries were minor. Next one is titled, "Kick Out the Tenant and Then Ask Him to Showcase the Place." Mid-2010s I was on a hunt for a place while crashing on a friend's couch. I was checking out a place for 40% of monthly minimum wage and having arrived at the agreed-upon time found an obese middle-aged lady telling an agitated nephew that he can't freeload in his room anymore. So I talked to her and always the marketer offered to do some free digital marketing tips, basic stuff that people just ignore. Before checking out the rooms, it never hurts to offer something valuable and low cost for free before negotiations. I found an amazing room that made me feel like a vampire count with thick ornate columns, high ceilings, velvet drapes, with the only light coming from the glass wall on one side that casted my silhouette towards the entrance and kept my face obscure sitting behind the desk. But I should scope out the place, right? So the landlord tells me she was bad knees and asks the nephew she just kicked out to show me around and upstairs, specifically to the room that just freed up, his. What? That's not wise. Not surprisingly he showed me the place flippantly, occasionally bad-mouthing it, and let me know that there are rats. Okay, nope. I said my thanks, left the lying landlord. That should have been the end of it. 2 days later, the landlord calls me in the middle of work and asks if I made a decision on the room and if I could show her the digital marketing tricks, to which I gave her the benefit of the doubt and refused sternly. That should have been the end of it. Yet she kept on calling. Even when I blocked her she found other numbers to call from over the next 2 weeks. One day I was in a foul mood, so I finally agreed, if only to get her out of my life, except she then directs me to the nephew she's kicking out, as soon as his room is rented, because she's not good with tech. What? That's not wise, but it's what she wanted. It turns out the freeloading nephew was a natural and he managed to rank landlord's apartment on the top 10 search results, complete with dead rats, dangerous fire escapes, fire hazards and all. The landlord was found in violation of numerous codes, and I now had a capable and admiring digital marketer who eventually helped me get employed after COVID layoffs. Next one is titled, "Landlord Wants a Professional to Install My Smoke Detectors?" Okay. This was posted as a comment, and I realized it is perfect MC. Whenever I move into a rental, I replace the smoke detector with a brand spanking new one, and usually add a second battery-operated one as well. I leave them in the units after I leave, but for my peace of mind, and because I have grown up with fire safety drilled into my brain, I want to be sure they will work properly, and that they will not fail. One landlord I had told me a certified fire protection company had to install the battery-operated smoke detector I bought. What the duck, it is 2 screws, and that an electrician had to replace the other hardwired one. I tried getting the maintenance guy to do it, but he wouldn't. Finally my dad, who owned a fire protection company at the time, came and installed it, not before asking if that was the detector installed in all units. When they said yes, he brought down the wrath of the fire inspector. The smoke detectors were over 40 years old and beyond life expectancy. After that, they never asked me to get a professional to do anything. I wonder why. ETA. For clarification, an electrician is not required for an install since no new lines were being run, so no permits needed to be pulled. Also, a professional did not need to install it, since it was being installed in a residence. They are only required if it is in a commercial area. I tried to explain, and show them the codes, but they would not listen. So my dad the professional installed it for me free of charge, and then reported them. What happened was they got fined, and had to replace every smoke detector. Funny how when head office got the report and stuff, they bought all new detectors and had the maintenance guy install them since no permits are needed. Next one is titled, "You told me I don't work for the company, so I guess I won't help you. I work for an insurance agency, not gonna mention who, handling day-to-day customer service. I call a customer, call him clown, because his homeowner's insurance was past due. He proceeds to give me attitude because he moved out of state and sold that home 4 months prior. He also has a personal umbrella policy for my state that he never got transferred over to his new state. Because I am only licensed in one state, I told him I cannot transfer his policy over and he needs to call the agency in his new state. Clown then decides to say, I wish I could talk to someone that actually works for company name. I told him I do in fact work directly for the company. To which he replied, but you don't work for them, do you? Or else you would be able to handle this. I explained to him and his 3 brain cells that agents can only ever do business in their licensed states, and for him to call his new office and sorted out the issue with the umbrella policy. After I get him off the phone, I proceed to cancel his home policy because it is in a state that I am licensed for. We are allowed to request from underwriting to cancel past 30 days, but it affects our agency's performance rating. Don't ask me why. When it's the customer fault we have to backdate that far. So I cancel his policy back only 30 days, despite the fact he sold the home 4 months prior, because duck him. He calls back a couple weeks later. He found out we didn't cancel the policy back the whole 4 months, and demands he is refunded for that time. I cut him off and say, you told me I don't work for company name. Why would you call me for help? He got even more pissed, going off on me all while I sat back and smiled. Once this guy finally stopped to take a breath, I chimed in. This sounds like a company name problem, so maybe you should call them, and I hung up. He never called back, so I assumed he called our corporate number. Moral of the story: don't treat customer service like shit and accuse them of not working for their company, then try to beg them for help. Edit. I was staying within company guidelines by not going back the whole 4 months. If it is customer fault, we technically aren't required to backdate at all, so I did this fella a favor. Last one is titled, Family Shares Everything? If you say so. So this happened when I about a little after I turned 18 years old. One day my mom and dad decided to take me with them to go grocery shopping. I really liked going shopping with them at that time because much like now, my appetite was close to insatiable. And for me, that meant food, food, and more food. By the end of our run, I literally had an entire shopping cart of stuff, frozen pizzas, spicy noodles, lunch meat, bread, etc. Mostly spicy food because I love to have some bark with my bite. Fast forward a few days after. I had just come home from school and all I could think about was watching a movie and stuffing my face with pizza. But when I opened the freezer I saw that out of the 3 pizzas I had only 1 was left. I was pissed at this because I knew for a fact that I hadn't eaten them myself. About 2 hours later my parents come home and I asked them both if they had eaten my pizzas. My dad said no he hadn't. But my mom, my sweet entitled mom, didn't even try to deny it. I asked her why she didn't just ask me for one of the pizza. I also added that had she asked I would have just given her one of them. Her response? I don't have to ask you for anything. You're my son. And this is my house. I got angry and responded with, yeah, this is your house. But I paid for that with my own money. Money that made on my own. I paid for it. The least you could do is ask before you start going into my stuff. For the record, this happened a lot. We would all go food shopping, my mom would get the bare minimum, and then help herself to whatever me or my dad bought. She didn't like what I said. And her response was, "I don't care if you paid for it yourself. I didn't raise you to be selfish. We're family. And in this house, family shares everything." Cue malicious compliance. One thing I'd like to add is that my mom at that time had a massive sweet tooth. If it had lots of sugar, or high fructose corn syrup, she just had to have it. One day, when she had left for work, I went into the kitchen and came across her not-so-secret stash of assorted sugary sweets. M&Ms, Skittles, Starbursts, the works. So I went into that bag and took every single pack of Skittles out, leaving just the other stuff. I gleefully ate the Skittle and for the remainder of her absence, chilled out in my room and waited. When she got home, she sat down to watch TV for a while and then she went for her bag of candy, and let me tell you her reaction was almost as sweet as her secret stash. At first she had assumed that my dad had eaten the candy, but that was brushed off considering that my dad didn't like Skittles for some reason. Then she came to me and asked if I had eaten it. Much like her, I didn't deny it. She immediately started ripping into me, saying that I had no right to go into her stuff. And how she'd ground me for doing it. I simply shook my head. Then when she asked me why I went into her bag, I looked at her with an innocent smile and said, "Well, you said family shares everything. So I didn't think you'd mind if I ate some of your candy." There was a few seconds of silence. Then without a word, my mom walked out of my room. My food stopped going missing after that. Thanks for listening.